Kamala Harris thought she had the upper hand. She walked into that panel with confidence, sharp suit, sharper words, and a smile that said, "I've got this." The audience was warm, the moderators were friendly, and the headlines were already writing themselves. It was supposed to be easy. Vivek Ramaswamy? A tech bro in a political suit. To Kamala, he was just another outsider, another disruptor, another moment she could dismiss with a clever line and a polished laugh. And when she finally turned to address him, that's exactly what she did. The crowd chuckled. The cameras zoomed in. Everything was going to plan. But beneath the surface, something else was brewing. Because while Kamala was performing, Vivek was preparing. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't even offended. He was waiting. And not just to defend himself. No, that would have been expected. He was waiting for the right second to shift the entire conversation, to turn a laugh into silence, to turn a setup into a checkmate. What came next wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it hit harder than anything anyone said on that stage that day. This wasn't just another political jab. This wasn't business as usual. It was a pivot point, and Kamala didn't see it coming. Because in less than 10 minutes, the applause would stop, the energy would shift, and everything, every single word, would feel different. The stage was set in Washington, D.C., an invitation-only policy forum, high profile, high stakes, think tanks, advisors, former ambassadors, the kind of room where every sentence is recorded, analyzed, leaked. The topic? Democracy in the digital age, the perfect playground for politicians to talk about freedom while carefully sidestepping responsibility. And Kamala Harris was ready. She'd been briefed, prepped, every soundbite polished, every question anticipated. She wasn't just attending, she was headlining. Vivek Ramaswamy, on the other hand, wasn't even supposed to be there. Originally, he wasn't listed. Rumor has it, his name was added last minute after another speaker pulled out. Some said it was a diversity move. Others said it was bait, a setup to throw an outsider into a room full of Washington elites. He knew it. They knew it. But no one really cared, because no one expected him to matter. The cameras rolled. The moderator gave the opening remarks. And as the panel began, the stage was already tilted. One side had power, polish, and the White House seal behind it. The other had questions. And that's what made what happened next so unexpected. Because the man who wasn't supposed to speak, he ended up saying the one thing no one could ignore. The panel's title sounded neutral enough: Safeguarding Democracy in a Digital World. But everyone in that room knew this was about control, censorship, misinformation, surveillance, AI regulation. The real tension wasn't in what they said, but in what they refused to say out loud. Kamala Harris came prepared with the usual narrative. That free speech comes with consequences. That platforms must protect citizens from harm. That the government isn't censoring, it's protecting. She used the words carefully: safeguard, moderate, balance, integrity. It was textbook political framing, the kind that sounds noble but hides the machinery behind velvet curtains. The audience nodded along. The press scribbled down quotes. Everything felt scripted, controlled, until it didn't. Because across the table sat a man who didn't come from the script. Vivek Ramaswamy wasn't part of their polished ecosystem. He wasn't running defense. He came to ask the question no one else dared. Who decides what the truth is? And right there, in that single moment, the mood started to shift. Slightly, quietly, but undeniably. Kamala leaned in, voice steady, tone confident, the kind of cadence that sounds rehearsed, because it was. She glanced at the audience, then back at Vivek, with that signature half-smile politicians wear when they're not actually joking. I appreciate your enthusiasm, she said, with a sweetness laced in steel. You've clearly read a lot of headlines, maybe not enough history. The room chuckled. A few scattered claps echoed off the walls. The moderator grinned. Kamala didn't look back. She knew she'd landed a clean jab. Then she pivoted, launching into a polished monologue about the complexity of modern governance, how nuance is lost on binary thinkers, how populism is dangerous when weaponized by amateurs. And all the while, her eyes occasionally flicked back to Vivek, not as an equal, but as a curiosity. It wasn't what she said that hit hardest. It was how she said it, with the ease of someone who believes the room is already on her side. And maybe they were, for a moment. Because confidence can be a weapon, but also a blindfold. And Kamala, in that moment, was both sharp and completely unaware of what was coming. The moment the words left Kamala's lips, the room responded like a well-trained chorus. Laughter, light applause. A few people leaned back in their chairs, nodding smugly, satisfied with the put-down. One reporter even tweeted it live. Kamala just roasted Vivek. Brutal. Retweets followed in seconds. The media machine was warming up. On stage, Kamala adjusted her papers and smirked. This was familiar terrain. She'd played this game before. Control the narrative, disarm the opposition with charisma, finish the sentence with a headline. And it was working. Or at least, it looked like it was. Because all eyes were still on her, until they weren't. Something shifted. Not loudly, not obviously. But if you watched closely, you could see it. The laugh from the front row turned into a cough. The moderator's smile flickered for half a second. Even the camera crew, normally robotic, hesitated on who to frame. It wasn't that the audience disagreed with her. Not yet. But something about Vivek's silence, his stillness. It created a tension that didn't belong. He didn't flinch, didn't take notes, didn't interrupt. He just watched, calmly, precisely, like a chess player staring at a move no one else had seen yet. And suddenly, the punchline didn't feel so final. For a full 10 seconds, Vivek said nothing, not a word, not a twitch, not even a breath that broke rhythm. He just sat there, eyes fixed, hands folded, still as stone. It wasn't passive, it wasn't fear, it was composure. And it unsettled people more than any argument could have. Kamala glanced over once, briefly. The kind of glance people give when they expect to see defeat, but find calculation instead. Behind Vivek, someone in the second row shifted uncomfortably. A staffer scribbled something, then stopped halfway through the sentence. The moderator looked at Vivek, almost cueing him, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Because Vivek understood something the others didn't. When your opponent plays to the crowd, the most powerful move is stillness. Let them perform. Let them overextend. Let the silence grow. Until it becomes so loud, people start asking themselves, wait, why isn't he reacting? That's when the narrative begins to break. Not with noise, not with protest, but with tension. And in that moment, Vivek wasn't losing. He was loading. Like a bowstring pulled tight. Calm. Focused. Waiting. When Vivek finally spoke, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. No raised voice, no defensive tone. Just clean, deliberate precision, like someone who didn't come to win the room, but to leave it different. He started by addressing the moderator, not Kamala. He didn't flinch toward her, didn't give her the satisfaction of being his opponent. She wasn't the target, she was the example. Before I respond, he said, I just want to be clear on one thing, the difference between opinion and power. His voice didn't spike, but it cut. He laid out his first point with quiet authority. That free speech isn't safe when those in power define what's safe. That censorship dressed up in benevolence is still censorship. and that the road to authoritarianism isn't paved with hate. It's paved with good intentions. The room wasn't laughing anymore. This wasn't a man fighting back. This was a man turning the table, one sentence at a time. Then it happened. Vivek paused mid-sentence, reached down, opened the leather folder in front of him, and slid out a small stack of printed documents. He didn't raise them like a prop, didn't wave them for the cameras. He simply placed the papers on the table, calmly, like someone setting down evidence in a courtroom. "I wasn't planning to bring this up today," he said, "but since we're talking about truth, context matters." He tapped the top page gently, a leaked memo, not labeled, not classified, but real. It referenced interagency communications about content moderation, and not just with platforms, but with news outlets too. Emails, directives, talking points, all coordinated. Kamala shifted slightly in her seat. Just slightly, enough to be noticed. "This isn't speculation," Vivek continued. "This is documentation, emails, meeting logs, drafts. You want to talk about protecting democracy? Fine, but let's not pretend it's being done without influence or pressure." Now the moderator looked nervous. You could feel the tension clamp down like a vice. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Because in that moment, it wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. And then, everything changed. Midway through a perfectly structured sentence, Vivek paused, reached calmly for the leather folder in front of him, and slid out a thin stack of printed papers. No theatrics, no raised voice, just movement with intent. He didn't wave the documents, didn't say, "Gotcha." He didn't have to. "I wasn't planning to bring this up today," he said, measured, "but since the topic is truth, I think context is fair game." He placed the papers in front of him and tapped once on the top page. A memo, unmarked but unmistakably real. No logo, no signature. But the kind of document that leaks when someone inside gets tired of being quiet. The first page detailed internal email threads between government agencies and several major tech companies. But that wasn't the shocking part. The memo showed something far more dangerous. Pre-approved narratives, language guidelines, instructions for what news outlets should avoid amplifying. Kamala's eyes flicked down for a second. Just once. Enough for the cameras to catch it. "This isn't conjecture," Vivek continued. "It's instruction, coordination. When the government influences what private platforms allow or suppress, that's not content policy. That's narrative control, and we all know where that road leads." Now the moderator wasn't smiling. Journalists stopped typing. Even the people who clapped earlier sat with arms crossed. No one said a word. Because when power is challenged with evidence, not volume, not rage, but cold, undeniable facts, people listen. And in that moment, Kamala Harris wasn't in command anymore. She was on the receiving end of something Washington hates most: unscripted truth. The documents were more than just memos. They were a blueprint, not of policy, but of control. The first few pages detailed recommended messaging for social platforms, crafted not by companies, but by government liaisons embedded in so-called public-private task forces. Phrases to push, topics to bury, accounts to flag. National Security Coordination was the label, but what it read like was narrative management. And it didn't stop there. One page referenced media briefings where journalists were guided on how to report certain controversial topics, what angles to lead with, what words to avoid, what questions not to ask. Another page showed internal Slack messages between officials discussing how to handle influencers who went off script. Not ban them, just demonetize, throttle reach, shadow suppress, make them invisible without making them martyrs. This wasn't censorship with jackboots. It was censorship with spreadsheets, algorithmic, quiet, precise. Kamala didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because the room was already saying it for her, with silence, with glances, with the kind of stillness that only happens when the illusion breaks. And in that stillness, Vivek said something so quietly, it landed harder than a shout. Democracy dies in darkness, but sometimes it's managed in daylight. Kamala didn't respond immediately. She couldn't, because there was no safe move left on the board. She looked down, not dramatically, just long enough. Long enough for people to notice. Long enough for everyone in the room to feel the shift. Her hand moved to the edge of the table, fingers tapping gently. A subconscious tick, the kind that comes when someone realizes the script is off, and there's no teleprompter to save them. She glanced at the moderator, then at the audience, and then, very briefly, at Vivek. Not with anger, not even contempt, just calculation. But it was too late. Because silence, when it comes after confidence, is louder than any sound. She cleared her throat softly, as if to speak, but didn't. And in that hesitation, in that 1-second vacuum, the illusion collapsed. The control was gone. The narrative she'd been driving for 15 minutes? Hijacked, not by aggression, not by volume, by documentation, by stillness, by a man who never raised his voice, and didn't have to. Something shifted, not on stage, not in words, in the room. You could feel it, that sudden stillness when no one knows where to look anymore. When the certainty evaporates, and all that's left is the question, wait, did we just see something real? A man in the second row stopped taking notes. One woman crossed her arms, slowly, like she didn't want to be caught doing it. The moderator's lips parted slightly, as if to speak, then didn't. Journalists blinked behind laptop screens. A few glanced at each other, not with amusement, with concern. You could almost hear the narrative tearing, not exploding, but unthreading, like a suit pulled apart stitch by stitch. Vivek didn't gloat. He didn't lean back. He didn't smile. He simply sat there, like a man who hadn't won, but revealed something that couldn't be unseen. And Kamala? Still silent, still watching. But her role had shifted, from the speaker to the subject. The moderator cleared his throat. Someone in the back reached for a water bottle, trying to break the tension with a sound. Any sound. It didn't work. Because when a moment like that happens, there's no going back to business as usual. No, thank you for your insights. No, let's move to the next topic. Everyone knew. Something shifted. Kamala adjusted her mic. Vivek adjusted nothing. The moderator glanced at the clock, but even time felt different now. In that room, in that exact minute, power changed hands, and no one could say it out loud. But they all felt it. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in a very long time, a politician was outmaneuvered not by scandal, not by outrage, but by something far rarer. Proof. So what happens now? Does the story disappear by morning? Do the networks cut the clip before the folder hit the table? Or do people finally start to ask the one question that changes everything? Who's really running the narrative?